One of the big lessons throughout my climbing years has always been that pushing yourself is incredibly valuable. You can try V17s when you're climbing V5s if you want to, like nothing's really stopping you. And if you get psyched from it and you manage to push yourself, you are gonna learn something.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Devlin, and welcome to the Struggle Climbing Show, where I talk with elite climbers about their struggles and breakthroughs in training, nutrition, tactics, and mental game, and also what they're passionate about beyond the fight with gravity. Now today we are chalking up for a chat with elite boulderer, comp crusher, YouTuber, and perennially psyched climber, Emil Abrahamsson. Most of y'all are familiar with Emil's talent as a climber as well as a YouTube creator, and first let's hit on some of those climbing highlights. Emil is an incredibly strong boulderer with a particular talent for compression and sloper problems, along with harnessing dynamic movement. He has sent loads of the world's toughest blocks, flashing up to V12 and red pointing up to V15, y'all, which he accomplished on the Dave Graham test piece Story of Two Worlds. He documented that process beautifully on his YouTube channel, which has over 100,000 subscribers and is growing fast because the content is just so dang good. He has a real skill for bringing us viewers into his process, riding the roller coaster of emotions from beginning to end. And he also creates fantastic training content, most famous of which is probably the No Hang Protocol video, which he put out a couple years ago and went mega viral. And that's something that we talk a little bit about today in our training chapter, if he's still using that and how his opinion on that video and that protocol have changed in the past couple of years. Emil really exemplifies the intangible traits that make elite climbers who they are: an incredible work ethic, unstoppable passion, and seemingly unlimited psyche to dig deeper and try harder than ever seems possible. This guy tries hard. I mean, he will work the same move 100 times and learn something on every single attempt, whether he's making progress or not. He has such a great perspective on what we are all capable of doing. He believes in us, even if we might not believe in ourselves, as I discovered in today's conversation, and I just know that you're going to leave this one more informed and motivated than ever. All right, just a quick little update here from my climbing life. I am coming to the tail end of a strength building phase here, where I've been doing a ton of weight training, like heavy hangs, bench, squat, deadlift, that kind of thing. It's been fun. It's been a struggle, for sure, but it's been a fun struggle, and I am now starting to get psyched to work on some endurance training on my program as I start to get ready for the fall. So as I set my sights on the tread wall and the lead cave, I am also setting my sights on the nutrition and the supplements that I'm going to need to help keep that pump at bay so that I can stay on the wall for just a little bit longer. And my go-to in that category is Sendurex by PhysiVantage. I'll just mix a scoop into some cold water and drink it down during my warm-up, and then reap the benefits as it contains all natural ingredients that have been shown to boost power endurance, stamina, and recovery between repeated efforts. That's what I'm talking about. Sendurex is NSF certified for sport. It contains no sugar, no caffeine, no artificial colors or flavors, and it is delicious. I highly, highly recommend it if you're going to be doing some endurance training. Check it out. Along with all their amazing products that are going to help you level up. You can hit that link right there in your podcast player or pop on over to physivantage.com/struggle15 to get 15% off your order. That's physivantage.com/struggle15. And the official chalk sponsor here at The Struggle is none other than Friction Labs, the best in the game. I'm telling y'all, as I get out to the red on these humid summer days right now, I am so glad to have Friction Labs in my arsenal. Their performance chalk lasts longer, and it's free from fillers, rosin, and drying agents, which means your skin stays in great shape, and that's super important if you're going to be getting a lot of mileage in like I'm doing right now. What I love to do is just hit like a base layer of their Secret Stuff liquid chalk, and then dip my hands into some Gorilla Grip when I'm on the wall to freshen it up. I definitely chalk up less when I am using that combo, which means that I can make more moves and hopefully get to the chains before punting off due to lack of fitness. Last week there was plenty of that kind of punting, but at least my skin was in great shape. And I also really appreciate that Friction Labs packaging is now 100% recyclable, and they put a lot of work into that because they are dedicated to doing the right thing for climbers as well as the places that we climb. It's truly the best chalk out there. You can try it risk-free to see for yourself. Enter code STRUGGLE20 at checkout for 20% off your first order. How cool is that? Chalk up less and climb more with Friction Labs. And lastly, just a huge shout out to all you patrons and subscribers out there. If that's you, you not only get this episode ad-free, but you also get about 20 minutes of bonus content with Emil at the very end, so be sure to stick around for that. Now, if you're not a patron or subscriber, I would love for you to consider it, and I'll tell you more about that at the tail end here. But first, let's get psyched out of our minds with Emil Abrahamsson.
Let's see, in like 2 weeks, I'm leaving to head to Lofoten Islands up north.
Oh, cool.
In Norway. It's going to be amazing, yeah.
They got boulders up there?
They got everything. They've got mountains, they've got boulders, they've got trad routes, they've got sport climbs. It's kind of like I guess it's not as well known as it should be, but it's basically Switzerland, but in the north.
Man, that sounds
and very climbable. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, for sure.
Dude.
For sure.
So you're like now fully a wide boy. You're just a trad climber now, huh?
yeah, I'm trying to. Working on it, step by step.
I love it, dude.
I've learned the tricks anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like half the battle. Then it's just a suffer fest, right?
Exactly. Just gotta power through.
Cool, man. Well, I'm already rolling, but do you have any questions about the format or anything before we jump in?
I don't think so. I've got some small notes, just like there might be a puppy running around here. So hopefully not, but I might have to pause here and there just so you know, which, like you said, should be fine.
Yeah, no worries. I've got 2 dogs currently sleeping down at my feet. And so I find myself, and they always, whenever I record an interview, they come down here. They just know that I need quiet. And so they come down here, and then one will inevitably, in the middle of it, start chewing on a bone. And we'll start to pick it up on the audio. And the other one snores so loud. And I wish, I don't think the camera will point this far down, because they're like, I literally have no room for my feet right now. So I'm sitting on a Pilates ball, and my feet are kind of like, it's like I'm riding a horse.
Scrunched in there. Nice.
So yeah, feel free to take a break. Is this a new dog of yours, or you've had a dog?
It's a new dog. Yeah.
Oh.
New family friend.
Yeah. Great. Is it a big dog or a little dog?
That's good. It's a golden mountain dog, so mix between Bernese mountain dogs and golden retrievers, so pretty big.
That's a big dog.
It's a big
dog. Dogs, big poops. That's what I know.
Big poops. What dogs do you have?
I've got a couple like medium size, like a Cavalier King Charles and a kind of a mutt mix. They're like 30 pounds.
Okay.
And I've got a cat. And we got a stray cat that we just adopted. So now 2 cats and 2 dogs, 2 kids. I'm very much outnumbered here.
Keeping up the good fight.
See, van life becomes more and more alluring to a man in my position. Then I'm sure it gets old after some time. I've talked with Steven about this, and I know you've done a stint in the van for a while as well. But for those of us that have the house and the lawn to mow and the dogs and the cats and all of that, sometimes one fantasizes just living in a van for a while.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah. I totally get that.
Grass is always greener.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
Well, man, I'm really excited to talk with you. I've just been a big fan of your climbing, your YouTube for a long time, heard you on a lot of interviews, and I know that we have a lot to gain from diving into this conversation. If you're ready, we'll just go ahead and jump right in.
Yep, I'm ready to go. All right. Let's go.
Cool.
I'm psyched. It's going to be great.
Right on. Well, look, it's called The Struggle for a reason. So that's the gateway that we enter in here. And so just big picture, before we dive into training, nutrition, tactics, mental game, all things that I think you're as psyched on and as obsessive about as I am, and a lot of people who are listening here. Before we kind of dive in and get specific, let's just think about struggle for a second as it pertains to climbing. And what does struggle mean to you as a climber? What's your relationship with struggle?
I mean, in a way, it encompasses everything in climbing, because you have so many struggles when you're out there. I mean, anything from like the very practical things, like how to get to the boulders and how to get up the boulders and how to like just physically climb, as well as the mental aspects and everything that comes with, from how to prepare, how to mentally engage, how to just be ready to climb. I feel like all of these things are struggles that I relate to climbing. But I also, in my world, struggles are awesome because they teach you so many new things and they help you evolve. So, I mean, all the struggles that climbing actually brings to the table are also great things for you as a person and as an individual. And I think in many ways it's helped me like in all aspects of life. Because it's a very, like, when you tackle an obsession that you're also struggling with, I think it makes ordinary tasks much easier to deal with as well. Because you kind of wire your brain to work like really hard with some things.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I do feel that climbing has that unique ability to push us in ways to grow and evolve that we can then carry over into other objectives, challenges, adventures in life, be it work or family. For you, when you look back kind of at your climbing journey, how has that relationship with struggle changed or evolved?
Ooh, I mean, in a lot of different ways. I've always been a very emotional climber in the sense that I scream to get more power. Like I just emotionally express myself like that. I cheer like a maniac. I mean, you've seen the clip of me doing Power of Now, for instance, and I run around like Gollum on the top of it. Like I really express myself a lot through climbing, and that's both good and bad. It's really good in the sense that I try freakishly hard, and I really want to get better, and I actually, when I'm climbing, I'm giving it my all very often, which helps me just progress, push forward, learn a lot of things. But it can also be kind of detrimental and a big struggle. So for the first couple of years of my climbing, I was constantly chasing like that next level, trying to get better, which to a degree I do nowadays as well, but in a very different way. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But for that duration, like the bad sides, when it's not going as I planned or wanted, it would be like soul crushing, and I would just get so frustrated and angry and toss chalk bags and just get so mad. And I think it's a really tricky balance, because if you take all of that away, all of that frustration, all of that anger, you also take away the good parts for me. So it's more of a balance between the two, and trying to figure out like when do you allow a portion of that frustration in, and when do you allow that joy in, and kind of, piece them together to make a whole climber, somebody who doesn't like just get pissed off because it's not going perfectly, or only gets happy when it's going well. So you just get the best out of both worlds, and that balance has been a massive struggle for me to figure out how to like thread between and walk, like understand. And it's taken many years to get to the point where I am today, where I feel pretty mentally balanced, I would say, most of the time. I can get frustrated for sure, but I also always know how to dial it back down and just kind of recenter myself, which I think has helped me tremendously in my climbing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's going to be some really rich territory for us to explore, especially in the mental game chapter here. As you said, we'll get there in just a little bit, but just to know that over these years, you've continued to explore that balance, and sometimes the pendulum swings one way, sometimes it swings the other way, and you're still looking to discover that. I think that for all of us as climbers, that's part of our journey as we start out climbing, and maybe it's just fun and it's a lark and you don't know much, but then you get more serious, you get more passionate, you're dedicated, you start to put real value and stakes on performing, and that's where the struggle really can start to come in, when you start to care, right? And so for you to be that emotional at times just means that you care that much. And how do we harness that? How do we deal with that? I'm really excited to dive in with you in just a little bit. But first, we'll talk about training. And training is something that you seem to really like. I mean, first of all, you're very good at it. You do a really good job, I think, exploring different training methodologies and protocols, and also communicating those in a really good way through your YouTube and Instagram. Not every climber is super psyched on training. Some climbers out there, I just spoke with Chris Sharma. He didn't have much to say in the training chapter here. He was like, well, I just go out and climb the hardest stuff. Obviously that's working for him, so I wouldn't suggest otherwise. But other climbers get really into training, and it seems like you fall into that camp. So in an area where you have a lot of experience, a lot of expertise, let's first explore where you struggle in your training, Emil.
Ironically, I would say it's structure. While I am like I care a lot about training and physiology and thinking about all things that are training related, I do fairly often struggle to find like a good balance between how much I can push my body, how much I need to rest, and how much I can incorporate climbing in physical training as well. And like, because it's very easy to train so hard that you just can't climb well anymore. and suddenly you're kind of doing yourself a disservice, because the training won't really help you at all if you're overdoing it. So it's a tricky balance to know how much I can push my body with. That's been a massive struggle for like all of my years of climbing, and to a degree still is, in the sense that it's just like, what happens is I just get so fatigued from session to session, and I don't really have the balance there all the time.
You can get a little overspoken on training, really hyped on it and overdo it. So how do you structure then, or once you recognize that was the case, was it just that were you feeling fatigued? Were you getting injured? What essentially opened your eyes to that? And then what did you change?
So yeah, it's mostly inconsistency in the training, and like the expectations for, say, how many reps of pull-ups you should be able to do, or how much you should be able to add as weight. With every session, you should kind of be able to gauge like, oh, it should be within this interval, say 100 to 120 pounds of whatever added weight for X amount of reps. Like, you should be able to have that interval. But for me, the difference can be pretty massive in terms of how much I can hang on. And also it can be tricky to understand just like why that is sometimes. Very simple explanation for most people, and fairly common for me, is, as mentioned, overtraining, like doing it too much for too many sessions in a week and not really listening to your body enough. And that's what I have done to prevent it as much as possible, is really figuring out like, how do I listen to my body? What does it mean when I am tired, and how do I make myself not tired? Is it protein shakes? Is it more rest? Is it what's the way to go? And I definitely figured out how to listen to my body more, but I still struggle to find that perfect structure where it's just like I can see the gains, I can gauge exactly how much I'm going to be able to pull. So yeah, still a struggle, but yeah.
Yeah, along those lines, do you have a general outline each week for X amount of days of strength, X amount of days of power endurance or volume, that kind of thing? Like maybe break down what a general week looks like, and include your programmed rest as well as part of that.
Sure. I should first mention that it does differ a lot over the years, depending on what I want to prefer. Like, since I'm editing a lot of videos, I can't really have that perfect training schedule all the time. My ideal, or like the average, I guess, of my training looks like this. I'll have 3 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on, 1 day off continuously. And that'll be 1 day where I focus a lot on climbing specific. So very technically challenging climbing, and just trying to focus on body movement, understanding where I am. And that's supposed to be kind of my peak day of performance. Like, that's where I want to be very connected to my body and know like, oh, this is how my fingers are feeling. This is how the tension through my hips is feeling. And like, I want to be strong that day.
And that might be on set problems or outdoors on boulders.
It can be either, I would say. Usually if I do an outdoor session, I try and also do an indoor session if possible, kind of depending on the boulders I do outdoors, how demanding they are. But it's very common that I don't get very tired from climbing outdoors. So I have like a little bit too much left in the tank of the good parts that I do want to keep on practicing on.
Right.
I'll usually do one sort of like 1 day of physical training. So it's usually some sort of power related exercises. This also differs.
Would this be day 2 of the?
That's the other thing. I also listen to my body a lot in this. So oftentimes it's day 2. However, if the first day is like one of those where I'm just not really feeling it, if the rest day has kind of made me a bit like loose and not so tensed up, ready for climbing,
right,
then I'll probably do something else on the first day, and have that be probably the physical training day, or a kind of volume day where I try and get a lot of climbing in.
Sure.
And
then on the physical training day, we're talking like lifting weights and this kind of thing. Maybe get a little nerdy for me for a second.
Yeah, it does differ depending on the season and what I want to focus on. I would say most of the time it's focused around like very powerful exercises, low amount of repetitions, and very, very powerful, like really just recruiting every single muscle fiber. So like campusing can be an exercise that I'm doing there. Weighted pull-ups is very common. Fingerboarding is often involved nowadays. And also I would say some sort of compound lift. So yeah, I do. This kind of comes and goes, I would say, but I try and make sure that I have a pretty, like, that I can do proper deadlifts, and I can do bench press, and I can do exercises related to that at a level that I know like is good for me. And if I feel like I'm a lot weaker at those than I usually am, I try and incorporate them into my training again for a while to make sure that I keep that level high up. And then I might lay off it for a little while to let my body recover and just get more adapted to it. And then, bring it back in. I don't really try and increase the numbers very much. So like doing heavier and heavier deadlifts, for instance. And it's just like I do want to keep it at a certain level and maintain that. And so I guess it comes in as sort of like a testing phase every now and then. It's like, oh, can I actually lift much still? And if I can't, I try and incorporate a little bit gently into my training, like once, maybe twice a week.
Got it. And so that hypothetically, or on average, that may be a day 2. So just speaking in generalities here, but you have a rest day, you come back, you're going to do a performance day. That might be out on a session outdoors, followed by maybe some indoors, or maybe just a full indoor session where you're trying to perform, move, execute. Day 2 is that strength training or kind of weightlifting. You might be doing some max hangs, some weighted pull-ups, and then maybe a little antagonist type stuff or posterior chain deadlift, these kinds of things. And then day 3.
So day 3 is the more chill one, you could say. It's usually a sort of volume session. So I should mention on the first day where I'm trying to keep it performance oriented, I'm also climbing very hard problems. So stuff that's kind of at my very limit. Or at least somewhere around there. So it's usually on a spray wall, maybe on a kilter board, or maybe outdoors, like you said.
Right.
But I'm not really getting volume in there. It's just perfect movement in my book.
Maybe like,
and then on the third day,
limited move. So 4 or 5 moves at basically max level, and then you're taking a rest for a few minutes.
Somewhere around there, I would say. Like it can be slightly more depending on if I'm setting something on the spray wall and I'm trying to make it a little bit longer. But generally, it's imagine that those like outdoor projects that you want to accomplish brought either indoors to a training facility or, as mentioned, outdoors.
Got it.
And then on the third day is very much volume oriented. I would call it kind of like the chill day, where I just purely listen to what I want to do. If I just want to climb around on a bunch of slabs, I'll climb around on a bunch of slabs. If I do want to do a little bit of performance-oriented climbing, if I'm feeling very fit and ready for it, I will as well. But oftentimes it's more just running around on problems in the gym, maybe some of the commercially set ones, or just getting a couple of kilter board boulders done for fun that I know are easy for me.
Yeah, cool.
And then these 3 days are cycled basically every single, like 3 days on, 1 day off. But the main thing is where I listen to my body and switch these days around. And the chill day could even actually be just a chill day where I'm literally just going into the gym and I start stretching because I'm just not really feeling it for climbing.
Right. And I really like I like the simplicity of how you structure those 3 days. And everyone's going to be like, I'm in my 40s now, and so I'm usually like a 2 day on, 1 day off. So my structure would be a little bit different. I just need a little bit more rest. I feel snappier and stronger if I have a little more rest in. But you know what works for you. But I also really like the flexibility there where maybe you're feeling a little like you need to clear some cobwebs. So maybe that day 1 isn't going to be the performance day. Maybe you need to do some volume that's submaximal so that day 2, you're feeling primed to go in there. And so really just listening to your body, but knowing that you're going to have an A, a B, and a C day, and those might shuffle around a little bit, but that's what you're going to tackle. And then you're going to have a rest day. I really like the simplicity of that. And then on the rest day, you're saying maybe you're doing some mobility stuff. Are you doing any like cardio, or are you just like editing all day? Is it truly just rest?
I would say ideally I never have a proper rest day, because proper rest days can really get me quite slow and just break my training cycle quite a lot. So I try to do definitely not running 5 miles and doing campusing, but hopefully like maybe go for a little bike ride or just walk around a lot or do something that's kind of getting the heart rate going. I think it's pretty good.
Sure.
I've also done the no hangs protocol quite a lot over the past couple of years, and that's almost always included in those rest days when I'm like in a good training cycle. Yeah. So there's definitely some sort of activity, but also not that intense. I do try and keep it as like my recovery day for sure.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the no hands protocol, because we can't have a chat here without at least talking about that in the training chapter here. It was this kind of sensation when you first came out with the video, which I remember it was a couple of years ago now, I think. And I started doing it. You were so hyped. The results were so clear. And it's also a very easy thing to do. And we're all looking for kind of, what's that one easy thing we can do, right? I'm curious now, a couple of years looking back on that. What's the big takeaway?
So the big takeaway is, I mean, things can spread like wildfire. in the first video, I explicitly said, like, don't try this at home.
Right.
It's a one-person experience. And I don't know how many messages I got about people trying it. And especially, I suppose, the people who reached out are mostly people who also got great success from it. I do think some people won't see any difference from it at all. Some people might get tweaky fingers, etc. So I think you can see any results as you can with any form of training. And there's like no strict, like, this is what you'll get when you do this.
Right.
Like, that just doesn't exist in training. Everybody's an individual. Some people, for instance, strive a lot on having these very rigorous training schedules, and I don't, like we just talked about. I'm more flexible. But the biggest takeaway is, like, I mean, I really, really like the protocol, and it keeps on giving me the results that I want from it. But I'm not so convinced that everybody like fully understands what that means for me, because it's very hard to express in such a short amount of time.
Sure.
Like, I want healthy fingers. I want them to keep on, like, just being able to perform on the wall. I want to feel like that chain of my climbing is not falling apart. And that's what the protocol provides. It doesn't provide these insane gains that I got all the time consistently, and they just keep on growing. Like, they stagnated for sure, but they kept on being at that high level when I include this protocol into my training, which is exactly what I want from it. I don't care whatsoever that it's going to get any stronger. Like, that I don't expect, but I'm not so convinced that people actually realize that that was the case. There were a lot of comments about people basically stating, like, oh, you don't have any progressive overload, you can't build stronger muscles, blah, 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 etc. And to a degree, I think that's very true. But that's also not the point. The point was just to make sure that my fingers were healthy. That was the starting point of it all. And that's kept on being the case. So I do still do the protocol, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. But I also think it's hard to know like what your expectations should be as a climber, because I'm sure it's very individual. And I can for sure tell from all the messages I've gotten about it that it is very, very, from person to person.
Right.
I've seen a lot of people saying, like, oh, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm so thankful. Thank you so, so much. And then there was some comment here like, oh, I popped my pulley a couple of days after doing this. And some people saying, I noticed literally no difference whatsoever.
Right.
So I think it's always with training, you have to look into yourself and see, like, what do I expect from this? And then just try something, see what you get from it. Wasn't your expectation? Great. Keep on doing it or do it better. And the protocol has definitely kept on delivering for me personally on that level.
All right, man, let's shift gears here to nutrition and start, as we do, by talking about struggle and if there's an area that you've struggled in your nutrition.
Whoa, okay. I mean, for sure. There are so many, like, nutrition for me is a tricky topic. I definitely have like a massive sweet tooth. I've also gone quite up and down when it comes to weight in my life. We can, I guess, address that a little bit later and focus on nutrition for now. But yeah, it's definitely a tricky topic. And added onto that, I was also, I'm vegetarian now, but I was vegan for a few years, and I've basically had those type of diets throughout my adult life. I think the tricky thing is the balance between, like, what do you need, what do you want, and like in what, like, when can you have it? Mm-hmm. Because for me, for instance, if I'm like at home and I'm just like working, going climbing, living my regular life, you could say. So editing for a few days, I'm in front of the computer a lot, like maybe 10 hours a day, and climbing a few hours a day. Like, that's my average day. Like, the balance between because if I'm at home a lot and I eat like a lot of gluten, for instance, mostly if it's like crackers or that type of stuff,
right,
I get like so inflamed in my fingers and everything. It just hurts so much. But it's also one of those things that I just go up and grab when I'm working at home. But if I'm out climbing, for instance, in the forests, I can basically eat whatever I want, and my body will respond quite well to it. It's like craving stuff all the time, and it's tricky to like not crave stuff when I'm at home, and balance what I want to include in my diet as well. And I think it's I mean, the thing with nutrition is just as with training, it's very, very individual, and I have still not really learned what it is that I need personally, to be honest, to like really thrive and be at my best. I've figured out some things, and I know that like refined sugars definitely don't do me really well, basically whenever. Like, even if it's something that I want to treat myself to, my body does not respond well to it at all. Right. And like figuring those things out takes so much time, but it's definitely worth working with. And I think like a nutritional coach is something I've thought a lot about reaching out to. Still haven't though, but I definitely think that's a big step and a good step for people to help with their climbing.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And there's definitely, as you said, first of all, it's highly individualized, but there's also a lot
Hmm.
in nutrition that can be wrapped up with emotions. And, there can be a lot of emotional baggage around nutrition, around
Mm.
fueling, around body image, around weight. And it's certainly no surprise that in this sport that we all love so much, there are loads of issues with disordered
Mm.
eating and body image and this kind of thing. You mentioned that it's something that you had wrestled with it sounds like, or at least
Mm.
your weight has swung around. If you're willing to share a little bit about that, I'd like to understand maybe what that journey was like, what that struggle was like, and maybe what some key learnings were or takeaways
Hmm.
that you gained from that journey.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's always really good to share this with people, for everyone in general, like just sharing your journey with eating either disorders or non-disorders or whatever your approach to it is. Like it is a very taboo topic, and I think it really, really shouldn't be in climbing, because climbing is a complicated sport. Like there's no denying that weight does matter in climbing. I think if you deny that, it's gonna become very tricky, because you won't be able to even open up the discussion about weight. And like people who might lean towards eating very, very little, they're not gonna like ignore that just because you pretend it doesn't matter.
Right.
But I do think it's important to understand how complicated it is, and how weight like affects you as a climber. So I'll start off by saying when I started, I was like around 16, and at the time I actually have a video coming out about this quite soon, and one of the important things that happened was, like, I was at the nurse's office, and she was using the BMI scale, and she said essentially like, "Oh, you're really close to being obese."
Wow.
Like my BMI was basically just on the edge of it, I think, or it was. And I remember how much that hurt in a way, for some reason. Like I mean, it's just one of those words that, like, wow, I couldn't help but feel like a bit of a failure at the time. My family is quite athletic, and yeah, it's just I felt like it's hard to explain. It's just felt bad about it, and that stuck with me for quite some time. And I started climbing, and quite quickly. Well, first off, I got into puberty, which helps you drop a lot of weight. So I grew like, well, in inches, I guess it's like 10 inches or something, maybe slightly more, 15 inches, and I was lighter by the end of it than when I started growing. So, I was just a kid who weighed a little bit more than he probably should have, but I definitely didn't do anything absolutely absurd, like eat McDonald's 7 times a day or anything like that. I might have eaten slightly more sweets than was the best for me, but it's not something you should actually attack, I don't think.
Well,
especially since
when you're 16 years old, you basically just eat whatever the heck you want. I mean, I did. I was drinking soda and eating sugar and all. I mean, you're not thinking about the best diet when you're 16 years old.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also, since everybody's so individually affected by it, like some people can eat 20 pizzas a day and it doesn't really affect them in terms of body fat or anything like that. But for me, it certainly wasn't like that, I would say. And but the weird thing was, then I as mentioned, I grew, and I dropped weight. I didn't eat anything differently. I did start climbing and training. But what was a bit tricky about that process is that, of course, since I was growing, I was gaining muscle and losing fat and growing and started climbing. So my progression in the beginning was like skyrocketing upwards. It's just like pretty obvious that that's going to happen. I got all the natural benefits that's good for climbing harder, and I, got a little bit lighter and still gain more muscle. So obviously, like, that helps me progress as I'm also progressing from just climbing and learning climbing. And because all of this happened in a pretty close interval, I believe I quite closely connected all of these together. Like, lose weight, climb harder, to a degree. Mm-hmm. But I'm also, like, I've always tried to be pretty sensible about weight throughout my life and not, like, think of it that absolutely. But it's always been in the back of my mind.
Right.
And I've always I've kept on growing, and I'm a fairly big person at, I think it's 80 something kilos, which is 185 pounds, maybe somewhere around there. So like fairly heavy for some, compared to many other climbers. And I've always been fairly heavy, but I've always had the mindset that, like, yeah, but that's genetics, and I won't be able to be incredibly light. So there's no point in me thinking about that even. Which is sensible, and like, it's been a good approach, is my opinion right now. But the problem with it was that I was also thinking, well, I should still try and be as light as is reasonable within my like genetic framework, I guess, which for me was 76 kilograms. Sorry, I can't really convert it, but yeah.
That's right. It's like a little under 170, I think.
Yeah, something like that was like my frame of reference, like, oh, this is where I can perform, be strong, and I should be around here or slightly lighter. That's where I thrive and be the best. And I kept this mentality for ages, for so many years, basically until last fall. So this being said, like I wasn't ever starving myself to get down to that weight, but as soon as I was gaining a little bit of weight, I was trying to like switch things around so that I would drop back down. So eat slightly less, like whatever it may be that has a few more calories in it, and just be a little bit more mindful towards it, which again at the time did make a lot of sense, but I think it's very hard to gauge how much you're actually pushing that and how much you're like at what level are you doing it. And it punished my training a lot, I've realized in hindsight. At the time I didn't. Well, I just don't think I've performed. I haven't been able to try as hard as I should be on every session. I haven't been able to push myself as much as I should be or can. But like the potential was there, but I wasn't utilizing it because I was hindering myself by thinking like, oh, this is the weight I should try and strive towards. Sure. And I think like that mindset is so harmful towards your long-term progression. And I think if I pushed it even further, because now, as mentioned, like I haven't really tried to be super light ever. I haven't tried to like really, really push my weight down as hard as I can. I've just tried to gently nudge it down all the time. But even that has been harmful towards my climbing. And that's what I realized.
Not just harmful towards your like your mental health and like emotional health and just the quality of life, but also directly harmful to your climbing, which is a little bit, has historically been a little bit counterintuitive. But I think more and more we are starting to realize that everybody has their own kind of their ideal set weight, right? And being a little heavier maybe mean that you can be much stronger, and being much stronger might help you on the project better than being lighter on the project. And essentially the strength to weight ratio goes two ways. It's not just weight, it's also strength. And if you can be heavier but stronger, then that is the same as being weaker and lighter in a sense. And I may be oversimplifying it, but I mean, you've climbed V15. So depending on where you're at in where you feel your weight is at, you're obviously performing at an incredibly high level.
Yeah, and I'll bring up the anecdote to how this all changed, because last fall is when I kind of came to this conclusion that I'd been like gently progressing for a few years, but I hadn't really been able to push myself to where I want. And so I was like, oh, you know what? I'll just mess things around and try something completely different. So I'm going to be okay with gaining as much weight as I possibly can. And that'll be like my natural weight vest for a while. And I'll see what happens if I do something like that. So I pushed my weight up as much as I possibly could and was just trying to get it to wherever it needed to be to help me perform and try hard. So the only focus of my training was my training. Weight, like kind of diet to a degree, was like, it doesn't matter. Like I'll just eat enough and make sure that it's relatively good calories, like potatoes, pasta, stuff that just isn't refined sugars purely, that your body can process a little bit better. Like anything that just helps you going. And I ended up going from 76 kilos to around 83 at the time. So I gained 7 kilograms, like 15, 16, 17 pounds, somewhere around there. Right. And what happened by the end of it was I didn't lose the weight, and I was stronger than I have like ever been on every single strength benchmark you could imagine. Like just way, 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 way stronger, even at that higher weight. And was just like, okay, well, I'll just keep rolling with this. I went down to Ticino, and I could do a bunch of stuff that I definitely couldn't do before last year when I was there. And at that time, I was the strongest I'd been. So comparing the two strong faces, this was the very clear winner. And I also noticed that I could work on this B15 and eventually do it, and probably several others if I put in time for it. So it wasn't like one specific one where I felt the strength. It for instance, off the wagon is kind of not my anti-style boulder, but it definitely isn't one that suits me very, very well. It's super finger strength intensive in a pretty specific way that I'm not very strong at generally. And my progress on that one was insane compared to the year before, where it has this rose move, campus type move. Yeah. And I did it right away several times in a row this year. And the year before, I got kind of like I could dangle my way to getting close, but I wasn't close. And I felt the boulder could even be within reach, which was pretty insane for me to just see like, oh, okay, this is the progression I'm feeling. And then, of course, the V15 that I climbed was like the cement of it all. But what's a bit ironic is that, or not ironic, but the crazy thing, just how much that challenged my idea of weight is like, I came home, I weighed myself, and about a week after I got back, I was at 85 kilograms, which is, I think, like 190 pounds or something.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is, for my height, that's technically overweight.
Wow.
With the BMI scale. Yeah. Which just kind of puts it into absurdity, how freaking dumb that thing is. The thing that the nurse used for me when I was 15 that kind of damaged my mentality towards weight and myself at the time. And then it coming back now, and I was like, oh, I'll see how this actually is. And it's like, oh, an overweight climber does V15.
That is madness. I mean, just that you obviously are performing at an elite level, not only the top of your game, but the top of the climbing field, doing V15, and then having this, essentially this antiquated BMI system say that you're overweight. Now, BMI, I think, obviously there's a lot of discussion around that metric in particular, especially with comp climbing, and maybe serves the low end, right? Like being underweight, maybe the BMI can raise some red flags, but on the overweight side, clearly that doesn't make any sense, at least in your case. And again, we have to continue to remind ourselves that it's so highly individualized. We're talking about you right now. It's hard to draw general conclusions for everybody based on one experience, but looking at you and what you've learned on this journey, being lighter, being heavier, training, getting stronger, the different projects that you've been on, what conclusions have you made? What's the perspective now?
My conclusion now is that, well, the cool thing about training is that when you train, your body adapts to it. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, an argument against it is that, yeah, I did a V15 boulder, and I'm climbing around that level now, being heavier, but bouldering is shorter, so you can be heavier, which is totally fine. But the thing is, I'm training a lot more endurance now, focusing on a little bit of lead climbing for Lofoten, which I'm going in to this summer and stuff. And then I am dropping a little bit of weight. Like, it just naturally happens because I'm training more for that.
Right.
And the point is, like, don't care about weight. Like, that's the whole thing about it. Like, don't care about it, because if you train hard, the things you want to achieve, for those things, your body will adapt for it. And you'll probably lose a little bit of weight if your body needs to lose a little bit of weight to achieve those goals. Just set the goals, work towards them, train hard, and make sure that you have the nutrition and the fuel for it. And your body will adapt to it to the best of its abilities.
All right, so let's talk about tactics now, buddy. And this is a big category, of course. I'm interested to see where you take us. Maybe we could look through the lens of the Big Island or some other projects that you've spent time on. But first, let's understand where you struggle tactically.
Well, a basic thing, if you just look at climbing, is like how to distribute your attempts and the energy you have. Like I'll go 1,000 miles a minute and just like punch the rock until I eventually try and make it up it, or just get completely messed up and just have to go home. Which it does have a small advantage that I learned a lot in one session, because I'm not like some people give 10 burns even if it's their first session on a boulder and just like gently figure out the moves. But I try all the moves all the time until I'm just done for. Which can be like sometimes good, sometimes bad. Generally, the problem is that I keep on doing that in the subsequent sessions. So even when I've learned all the details to the boulder problem or the route, I still keep on just trying way too much.
Right.
So that's been a bit of a struggle, like figuring out how much to approach the rock and like how much to hold back and relax and recover and rest. Yeah.
I think this is really interesting, and this can apply to, I think, so many different aspects of climbing, but bouldering maybe the most slippery slope in this, because you pop off and it's not like you have to untie your rope and take your harness off and catch your belay buddy or you know, like the temptation is there and the ability is there to then just hop right back on. And I certainly experience this, like when I go out to the blocks with friends, where I'll just like rapid fire attempts and then just be absolutely destroyed for days. So I can understand the pitfall. What do you do to address it?
So I focus a lot on listening to my body in that. And the problem is my body is always saying like, go, go, go. But then I also know that if I just give it 1 or 2 more minutes, it's going to be fine. And I'm going to be able to perform better. So I don't really have that like specific 5 minute, 10 minute. The thing is, for me, if I rest for 10 minutes, like properly rest for 10 minutes when I'm not like really, really tired, what happens is just that I just, my session's over. I have to like warm up again and just restart it all.
Sure.
So what I try and do is like when I start feeling ready to go, I try and distract myself for a little while, like maybe do a little dance or something. I don't know, just walk away for a second, go up to the sun is shining, just go up and stand in it or something. So that when I've given myself a little bit more rest, I'm like fully psyched and ready to go, and then I hop on. So yeah, it fluctuates a lot in how much I rest. Even on like one specific boulder where I fall on the same spot, it can be 2 minutes of rest or 10 minutes of rest ish. It depends a lot on how my just what my brain is telling me in that moment.
Yeah, I like that. I like listening to your body in that sense. What about, I'm going to kind of bounce around here a little bit because the idea of comps came to mind because you only have a certain amount of time, right? And obviously outdoors you have unlimited amount of time. So kind of tactically speaking, can you compare and contrast, like what have you learned from comp style climbing that you take outdoors and maybe vice versa?
Well, I think from comps and comp style climbing, I have to separate. So I'll start with comp style, actually.
Sure.
Because comp style bouldering is really freaking fascinating in terms of how it's often set and the movements you have to learn from it. Because it's so incredibly specific how to make something perfect in a comp style movement. And usually it's at a grade that's so low compared to what you might be able to do on rock. So oftentimes what comp style does is it encourages you to move perfectly within a given space. Like you don't really have the option to move poorly or strong. You have to just move efficiently. And when you bring that to the rock, you can learn a lot of things and you can push so much harder if you manage to climb with that efficiency that comp style often requires.
So just so I understand,
I think,
comp style, you're saying the grade may be well within your limit if the boulder were to be given some sort of consensus grade, but the room for error is very low. So it's not that it's super hard or fatiguing, it's just that you have to execute the moves perfectly in order for it to come together, even though it may be a V10 and you're accustomed to climbing V14 or something like that.
Precisely, exactly like that. If you take like what comes to most people mind, like a paddle dyno or something. A paddle dyno, if you do that incorrectly, it doesn't matter if you climb V17 and it's a V9, you're just gonna punt off. But if you take that V17 climber and put them on most V9s, they'll just walk up them like it's nothing. And that's kind of the point, that they often require perfect movement to be able to execute it at any level. Even if you are climbing V9, it's going to feel kind of the same as if you're climbing V15. But the point is that you have to have that skill so extremely wired. And when you learn how to wire skills like that, I think it does transfer a lot to the outdoors because you wire movement outdoors in a similar way. And my style is pretty dynamic outdoors, and that comes from a lot of comp climbing. Like I have really hard time building body tension in a way. And so I have to move a little bit jumpy to be able to like make it through stuff. And that comes from not necessarily comp climbing, but like a lot of indoor dynamic styles that I've practiced over the years.
Right. I really like that. I appreciate you separating those two comparatives aside, because obviously comps are a different thing because of the time pressure and not being able to study problems ahead of time and these kinds of things, or not knowing as much going in. But I think that it is common for maybe older climbers, people that fall into my group, but it may just depend. It may be a personality thing. But when I walk into my gym and I see comp style problems, these kind of coordination problems, more dynamic movement, very nuanced footwork, slab type things, I just immediately turn and walk in the other direction. I just go find the crimpy overhung cave type route that I'm more comfortable on. Do you feel that honing that comp style, that more dynamic style, coordination type move for any climber does provide benefit on styles that aren't that at all? Like have you found in your climbing, when you're outside and you're doing something that's maybe a little bit less dynamic, something that's just more static and tensiony and crimpy, more of a straightforward old school rock climb, does comp style training still translate over?
The thing is, I would say that it overall does, but if you try and isolate it so specifically to one style of boulder or route, then no. Because if you're looking for that one specific style, then that's probably the only one specific style you should be training. But if you want to become a better climber, then most certainly I think it helps. But that's the thing, like what you want to become better at is quite individualized, obviously. And like some people, they have a much higher capacity of just building strength and building like body tension, finger strength, slow movements, static movements, stuff like that. That if their capacity is so high with that and learning a dynamic move is impossible for them, well, maybe it's not really worth the time. But if you manage to push through that, then yeah, I think it's valuable to bring into a lot of different styles of climbing. A lot of different styles.
So let me ask you this, because when I go to my gym, the comp style problems that are set tend to be out of my ability. Is there a way for me to look at a typically set jug route, like a V1 or something like that at the gym, and incorporate some of that movement or some drills that you might suggest for somebody like myself that just is very, very unaccustomed to climbing in that manner? How could I try to train that up in a way that I'm able to do before trying to get on the stuff that's specifically for that style that I'm not quite able to reach yet?
It's an interesting question, certainly, because I think when you say that, like you say that they're not within your reach, personally, I'm not entirely convinced you're right about that.
Well, I appreciate that.
But I can definitely tell that, like, I can understand that or empathize with the idea that they're just definitely not going to go. But I think that's the point. Like when you spend enough time on it, maybe it becomes possible. Like, but like you just said, you walk around, like you turn around and walk the other way.
Right.
So maybe you're not pushing yourself in those boulders already. Like, I mean, one of the big lessons throughout my climbing years has always been to like that pushing yourself is incredibly valuable, and you can push yourself. I mean, there's such a high ceiling right now. You can try V17s when you're climbing V5s if you want to. Like nothing's really stopping you. And if you get psyched from it and you manage to push yourself, you are gonna learn something. Then there's of course like the nuance to that, and you should probably not be pushing V17 when you're climbing V5. But honestly, when you are climbing V10, I think hopping on a couple of V15s here and there is going to be a good thing. And when you're climbing V3, hopping on a couple of V6s, V7s is going to be a really good thing. So I think limiting yourself to thinking what's possible and not possible can be quite detrimental. It's better to think like, yeah, maybe you can't do them in the same like fast fashion that a comp kid does, but you can still practice them and you can still learn something from almost any boulder. And comp boulders it's very rare that they're set at a level that like most people can't actually learn anything from them. Some like powerful comp boulders, when they're just like compression or jumping between pinches, yeah, that's probably not for everyone, because if you can't hold on to the holes, then you can't learn anything.
Right.
But as soon as you can hang on to the wall, you can learn something. Like as soon as you can do anything on the wall, you can learn something.
Dude, I love this. I love this. I really I needed to hear this. This is my therapy session today, because I feel like for me, I become very impatient on bouldering. Maybe that's why bouldering brings up like this level of kind of conflict or discomfort in me, as I'm more traditionally a longer sport route climber. So long kind of endurance-y type climbs. And so when I get on a boulder and there's one or two moves that aren't immediately feeling like they're doable, I'll just say, well, I got to go over to something else. And there is something unique to bouldering where you could try the same dang move 20 times, 50 times, 100 times. I'm sure you've put in plenty of that on some of your bigger projects. This kind of shifts us into the mental game chapter a little bit, but I don't want to forget the line of thought, which is how do you maintain that level of psych, and how do you dig deep and try hard when the progress is seemingly just not happening, or it's so small, it's such incremental progress that it may take sessions and sessions to just do a move or a very small sequence?
How I approach that? Well, I would say if you stop looking for progress, you're not going to see it, right? I mean, I've never encountered a move where I cannot make progress anymore on. Like, because in the end, if you are trying a move and you, as I mentioned earlier, if you're hanging onto the holds, you can most likely start to pull on something. You can start tensing something, so you'll be able to make some sort of progress on it. Whether or not you're getting closer on sticking the move or not is a different question, but you are making progress on the actual position and like exploring how you can move within that frame and within that position. And as long as that's happening, you are making progress. And I would say that I don't know if it ever happens that I just cannot make any more progress. Like that's I don't really encounter that. So, or at least not in my, like, from my perspective. So it's a harder one to address,
And so,
because it's just,
in that sense, though, progress for you, even though could be very small, very incremental, not even maybe doing the full move, but just getting a little bit more secure, a little bit tighter, a little bit closer, that's enough to keep you fueled, to keep the fire going, to say, okay, this is worth continuing to work on.
Yeah, exactly. I think as long as you're well, partly like enjoying the process of it, and you're not injuring yourself, you'll be making progress, and you should be able to like appreciate that progress as well. So yeah, I just try to always appreciate that minor, because the thing is, if I'm working on a boulder outdoors, for instance, I will be getting slightly stronger in those positions, even if it's, like, something will happen every single session.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. You've been a little bit of a Zen master. I mean, you've got a lot going on here that I could certainly benefit from. And this brings me back to the 45 on the Beastmakers. Even if I'm not hanging from it, if I'm just squeezing hard and just getting a little bit stronger, then I will look at that as progress.
Sweet, man. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, dude.
That's great.
I'm really psyched on all of this. Well, we're into the mental game chapter here, so let's just continue to truck forward. I skipped past my opening question, though, so let me go back in time here and ask you, with regard to mindset and mental game, what's been a struggle for you?
Well, I mean, I guess I did explore that a little bit earlier when it comes to...
Well, sorry, yeah, we kind of started the show with this, right? So yeah, let me reintroduce this, because I want to go back and peel back some of those layers. So when I asked you about what your relationship is with struggle in general, you said that there's been a bit of an evolution with it. And you specifically mentioned how excited you can get, how pumped, how fired up you can get, that there's real emotion that comes up and then out of you when you're climbing. And it's when you're trying hard, but also if maybe you're not accomplishing what you want to accomplish. So I'd love to just explore that a little bit more. What has that evolution been like? And you mentioned that there are some pros to having a lot of that emotion, but there are also maybe some drawbacks or some cons to having that. So what have you learned on this emotional journey for you when it comes to the mindset?
So a lot of it comes down to grades. Like, I've always been quite grade oriented, as in I care about that part of progression. I don't necessarily hold myself like very strict to I should be able to climb a grade or do this or that, but something within my style I can always track a grade progression with. Like, if I feel a boulder suits me, I can always track the progression there. But then again, like with a slab, for instance, I'm not the best at slab climbing, and whenever I progress slightly at a V7 slab, I'm still really psyched, because it's just like, oh, I'm learning some foot tricks. But if it is within my style, like Story of Two Worlds, for instance, which I did, or the Big Island, where I feel pretty comfortable on the holds, and like there's nothing distinct that's like, oh, this I shouldn't be able to do, I can track a sort of grade progression within that framework. And this also means that I could get very frustrated back in the day when I couldn't climb a certain grade that was within my style. And like that frustration is pretty harmful, but it's also there because I know I'm that strong and I want to be that strong. So I'm not that strong today. Like, why can't I deliver on it? And I think one of the major things I've learned with that is that, so with goals and grades, we set them very arbitrarily. Like, the goal grade that you have is an arbitrary kind of, like, first off, as mentioned, grades are arbitrary, and then you set that arbitrary goal for yourself. And then with that, you can also put a certain arbitrary value to it. So you can define for yourself, like, how much do I care about this climb or grade or whatever? Like, how much does it mean to me? And when you take control of that, you can also like minimize it when it's not necessary. So when it's hurting you or not helping you, that goal, that the caring about the goal. So when you acknowledge that it's like, oh, it's just a random goal I set up for myself for the heck of it. And when I started taking control of that, I could also stop caring when it didn't go as I wanted it to, which has helped me a lot with those struggles and with that like frustration that arises from chasing like that progression, that next level, that wanting to be better.
Right.
Because if you're just allowing it to just be this like something you should be able to achieve, that next level all the time, and you should be progressing towards it, and you feel you're not, then that's going to be a bad thing. But if you take more control of it and the value you put to it, then yeah, that can probably help a lot of people to just be in a better mindset more consistently.
So rather than identify a grade goal, and I like, by the way, that you also acknowledged that you are motivated by grades. And I think that there's been quite a bit of talk through the climbing community of, oh, it should never be about the grades. It should only be about the process and this kind of thing. But look, some people are motivated by grades. I've identified a grade that I want to climb this fall. I want to climb my first 13A. And I identified that before I identified the route, which maybe is a little bit backwards, like what you're saying there. So there's part of it where grades can be motivating. You look at a thing, you say, well, this is something that I'm going to get psyched to train hard for, and I'm going to be thinking about it when I fall asleep, and it's going to help me stay motivated when I don't want to get to the gym and all this. So there can be some motivational benefit to that. But I think if I'm understanding correctly, maybe even a better way than to just grab a grade out of thin air and say, I want to achieve this thing, is to maybe grab a route that you like, a problem that you like, that is of a grade that you want to achieve. And now that becomes the objective, and it's far more specific and far more maybe kind of tangible than just like this kind of arbitrary grade that what does it even mean? If I'm understanding that correctly.
No, it's very true. And I think, because I think a lot of people kind of dream about like, oh, one day I want to climb V9, V11, V15, whatever.
Sure.
And I mean, to a degree I have as well. Definitely. I mean, when I started working towards climbing V15, I even made a series about that on my channel and everything. And through that process, I've also learned that like you said, a lot of people say you should care about the process. And I do think like that's definitely something I started appreciating more. But I don't think caring about the process is necessarily for everyone. Like some people want to have a goal to achieve. And I think a grade can help with that goal. I don't think it's good to chase grades necessarily. And I don't think it's like that's the main focus. But I think chasing progression, I think, is pretty good for a lot of people. For me, it's been a cornerstone to my climbing. Really caring about becoming like a little bit better, learning new things. And that's within the entire framework of climbing. So as I mentioned earlier, caring about a V7 slab and a crimpy V11 that just doesn't suit me because it has small edges. Like something like that, just really, if you care about that part of it, grades also becomes a part of the equation because that is the metric we use. But then you have to, of course, orient your way around the grades and figure out like, what is the grade for you? What is the scale for me? And you'll notice that the grading scale is, I mean, in Europe, I would say it's like set up by dudes 175 centimeters. Like that's the average kind of. And like grades are based off of that in general. Right. And then there's a massive curve of how other people will experience it. But if that's your frame of reference, you have to be exactly like everyone else kind of who started establishing all of these boulders and routes. And the point being that they are going to be inconsistent for everyone because it's like, it depends so much on who started establishing the area and and everything. So grades are absolutely arbitrary, but then you can kind of start tracking them for yourself and figure out like the style that you're in and the grade progression you have within that style. And I've worked a lot with that and figuring out, how to orient myself around that. And it helps my mental game on, any project that I have.
I really like that. I love that perspective on grades because, again, we can use them to motivate, but maybe not to pin all of our self-worth and accomplishment and validation on, because at the end of the day, to your point, it's quite subjective. They are, by definition, very subjective. Now, you mentioned there was a process or a time period for you where you maybe hit a little bit of a breaking point in how emotional your climbing was making you. I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and then maybe kind of what happened subsequently.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So this was like the first time I started encountering my emotions as a climber, like properly. Because I was at this boulder, and this was many years ago, and I started, it was an 8A roof in Font, and I fell off the last move, which is like a 5+ move, so many times in a row. And it was maybe 15-20 moves for the entire thing, so falling there was so frustrating. Yeah. And I just got angrier and angrier, and then after a while, I kicked my chalk bag so far that all the chalk fell away, and I was just really annoying and just a bad person, like not really the kind of climber I want to be. And this was a turning point for me. So for several months after this, I just flipped, and I kind of like became completely ambivalent towards so many things in climbing, like how sessions were going. I was still a bit emotional back and forth, I guess, but very, very numb overall. And that hurt my climbing more, actually. So I started getting worse and worse and worse. I felt the progression I'd had was starting to dip instead of keep on growing.
Like you were too chill?
And
like you went from being very emotional to like almost a lack of emotion?
yeah, very much a lack of emotion, which had the effect that all climbing sessions were okay, but none of them were great. And any top out that I did was nice, but didn't really matter. And so it's kind of like this thing where it's like, well, do I really want to be this climber then? I mean, I'm a lot more chill, but it's not as fun to climb anymore. And I'll definitely not keep on doing it if this is everything I feel. Then it's more like regular exercise, like anything else, basically. And I started just really processing this a lot and thinking about like, well, how do I want to approach climbing? What is it for me? What does it mean for me? Like, why do I want to climb at all? And I did realize like that kind of fire and anger that made me kick away the chalk bag is also one of the things that made me so psyched on climbing and made me want to train harder and just keep on doing it. And so I kind of picked up that torch again. But as we talked about it a little bit earlier, I've worked on balancing that a lot. So I never try to let that like frustration or anger take over, and instead always try and keep, I mean, don't get me wrong, I still get frustrated when things aren't going my way, but just not to the same extent that it did back then. And I try and always like balance these two out so that I'm not either too psyched nor too non-psyched either. I always try and be happy when I climb something, but not to the degree where the opposite happens and I just get frustrated when I don't.
Let's now move on to our final chapter, which is things that you're psyched on outside of your own personal climbing. And there's loads of stuff. I think you're a really interesting guy, so there's probably any number of things we could talk about. But first, I have to steer us towards YouTube, because it was just today that you posted 100,000 subs. So congratulations. You're building something really cool there. I think your videos are very well done. They're entertaining, but they're also very informative. And I think that you obviously are working very hard on it. So I'd love to hear how YouTube's been going for you, what life as a YouTuber is like, and just what you have coming up, what your goals are. Tell me about what's cracking in YouTube.
Well, first off, thank you so much for all the kind words. I appreciate that. Yeah, YouTube's been a journey. YouTube's been a journey. The thing is, my goal was 100K, and since I reached it like before today, so I don't necessarily have a specific one after it. I just want to.
You're done.
Well, I want to keep on learning how to make better videos. Like that. That's always kind of been a focal point. Obviously, that just understanding how to tell a story, how to make something that's entertaining for more people and just engaging and stuff. And I wouldn't say like, I don't really have a knack for YouTube. I had to learn a lot of things along the way. And my friend Eric Carlson was kind of like the inventor of climbing YouTube, and he's helped me tremendously over the years, specifically around like, especially those things I just mentioned, storytelling and making something engaging, and all these components to make up a good video basically is a lot from him. And I want to keep progressing at that. Like that's one of the big focuses with it. Life as a YouTuber, it's a lot of editing. I think people don't quite realize how much editing it actually is behind it. Because oftentimes, you know, you punch out a video and it's like 10 minutes and you have to think like, well, maybe that's like an hour, 2 hours of work. But oftentimes a 10-minute video, most YouTubers will spend like 40 hours on it, I guess.
Yeah.
It depends a lot on the topic as well. If I do like a chill vlog or something, it definitely doesn't take as much time as if I do something like the hangboarding 2 times per day for 2 years. Like that took a tremendous amount of time. The thing that's a bit annoying is that when the more time you spend, you're not gonna get more from it, like more views or revenue or whatever. So it's a bit of a balance act between creating something that you're proud of and that you want to watch when you're 50 and creating something that people just want to enjoy watching for themselves.
Right.
And I try and balance that a lot. So some videos I make, I have like hold really close to my heart and like really proud of and happy about. And generally they won't be the best performing ones, but I just kind of have to make them to be able to satisfy my just happiness as a content creator.
Right.
And then some videos I produce because I know people are going to be super psyched about them and really enjoy them. And I feel like that makes me happy as well, because if I'm helping somebody's day out and they're enjoying my videos, that's such a beautiful thing to me.
Yeah, well, it's clear that you put a lot into these videos, and I think it's probably still surprising for listeners to hear that it could be 40 hours for a 10-minute video. I understand it because I'm on this side of the curtain as well. I'm recording and editing, and I've got a background in video production. And so I know how much goes into it. And you can also see a good video from a bad video just with regard to the quality of the topic and how the story's told, the variety of angles that are shot, these kinds of things that we've come to expect when we watch good content, but we might not even stop to appreciate it. And so now that you've been on that side for quite some time now, I'm curious what you have taken away as a climber from putting all this work into making climbing videos. Obviously, it's probably taking you away from climbing quite a bit because it's a lot of work. This is a job now, right? And I've heard Magnus say similar things. It's kind of be careful what you wish for when you become a really successful YouTuber, because then you have to continue to put out good content. I'm grateful that you are. I think the community is. What have you learned, and what has been the impact on you as a climber from you as a YouTuber?
So there's some basics, like it definitely given me a lot of perspective on my climbing, and also how I react and how I think when I'm climbing. Because when you're in your own zone, you don't really think like, how is this from the outside perspective? A bit of self-loathing, I would say, because you see yourself in an environment where, as we've talked about, I'm an emotional guy, an emotional climber. And when I see that, sometimes it's just like, damn, just be more chill, kind of, which can be a bit heartbreaking at times. Well, not heartbreaking, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Like, but I would say overall, it's like a very nice way to experience my climbing in hindsight, and just look at it from an outside perspective as well. And yeah, it's really nice to be able to document all of those memories and those emotions, and then try and put them into some sort of understandable video for other people.
Well, you mentioned that you've got you've got a trip coming up. This will probably publish in about a month. So what can we expect from your channel over the coming year here, or at least the handful of months that will follow this episode?
Well, so actually I'll be, my plan, it always changes a little bit, but the goal is to basically train for the Big Island properly. And I can say already now that I was back on it a very short amount, for like a short duration, a couple of months ago. And I was incredibly successful compared to previous years.
Sick.
And previous times. Yes, very sick, and I'm very psyched about that progression. And I want to like really, because I didn't expect it actually. I thought I was going to be I was kind of on like chilling a little bit more than actually trying to do it. And I was in Fountain, I was going to just climb around a little bit. But since it was there and the conditions were okay, I was like, I'll give it a go. And it went a lot better than I expected. So now it's very high up on my list I do want to document the training I'll do for it, and then also obviously go there and try and finish it off.
Hell yeah. Dude, yeah. Oh man, the psych is high. Last question here on this, and I can't wait to follow along with your training as well as your next trip out there. That's a nice teaser to get us all really excited about it. Climbing is so much of your life, whether you're competing for your country or you're making YouTube videos or just training and you're passionate about getting out on the blocks. What do you do to completely unwind that has nothing to do with climbing?
I mean, I definitely have a fair few things that I like to do. I've always liked playing the piano and doing something with music. So that's part of it. Recently, I've gotten into game development a little bit, which has been a lot of fun.
Video games?
Used to, yeah, computer games. Yeah. Computer games. And I used to study computer engineering before I, focused all my energy on climbing, essentially. And it's an area that I really enjoy and I think is very interesting. So actually a lot of podcasts I listen to are like programming podcasts and stuff like that.
Yeah. Cool.
So I guess those are my interests that switch away from climbing quite a lot, I would say.
Oh man, that's awesome to hear. Good. Well, if you come out with a game, then make sure you let me know so we can share it out with the world.
For sure. I will.
Fantastic, man. Well, look, I'm so grateful for your time today. I'm really hyped on all that you have going on and just incredibly inspired from this chat. I really appreciate you opening up and sharing how you did today, man.
Thank you. So kind of you to say. I appreciate that.
And that wraps up a totally psyched hangout with Emil, one that I hope that we can revisit again in the future. I got so much out of this conversation with him. What did you all think? Let us know. You can find us on IG at Emil_Abrahamsson_ and at The Struggle Climbing Show. Now, for patrons and subscribers, your edit has another 17 minutes or so of bonus content that's coming up for you at the end, where Emil shares the one finger training exercise that he couldn't live without, how to train for a front lever and if it's even worth doing, takeaways from his time on the Burden of Dreams replica, beta for improving on slopers, and so much more. So listen through to the end of this wrap up here, and after the music ends, that bonus content will begin. Now, in a second, I'm going to hit you with my takeaways from this awesome conversation, but first, let's support the brands who make it possible for this episode and so many others to come to you at zero cost. Give it up for Fizzy Vantage, the official climbing nutrition sponsor of The Struggle. Try Syndurex if you are looking to boost power, endurance, stamina, and recovery between repeated efforts, and who the heck isn't trying to do that? You can check it out along with everything else they make to help athletes perform at their best. In Europe, you can find it on the Epic TV and Banana Fingers online shops, and in the US at select gyms, and of course at fizzyvantage.com. You can hit that link right there in your podcast player or use code STRUGGLE15 at checkout for 15% off. And a big chalky high five to our friends over at Friction Labs, whose performance chalk is free from fillers and drying agents, which means you can chalk up less, which also saves you money and cuts down on the impact to the routes that we climb on. So pop on over to frictionlabs.com and use code STRUGGLE20 for 20% off your first order. Chalk up less, climb more with Friction Labs. So my takeaways from this conversation here with Emil really comes down to perspective. His experience with weight, effort, failure, progress, and emotion, and so much more, they all had a pretty powerful through line, which had to do with perspective. Time and again, he discovered new ways of viewing things, whether it was from gaining 15 pounds to send harder than ever, to exploring how harnessing emotion, whether it was too much or too little, could impact his attempts and his climbs, to working seamlessly impossible moves over and over and over again without giving up. Emil just finds new ways of looking at things as a pro, and I know that I can personally benefit from bringing some new perspective into my training and my climbing, especially when faced with comp-style problems the next time that I head to the gym. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. I'm working really hard over here to bring you interviews and content that I hope is helping you to improve at this sport that we all love so much. And if you'd like to hear more from Emil, as well as gain exclusive access to other perks, such as pro clinics from the likes of Alex Johnson, Jordan Cannon, Ravioli Biceps, Tyler Nelson, and so many more, along with the warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting me as I'm working my harness off down here in the podcast/utility closet, pop on over to patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show, or if you listen on Apple, you can simply subscribe, like with one click through your podcast player there. Also, if you'd like to see parts of this interview here with Emil come to life with some sick footage, then pop on over to the YouTube channel where we have videos with Emil, Alex Honnold, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Johnson, and other Crusher guests with all sorts of really cool visuals to back up the topics that we're talking about. That is all over at youtube.com/@The Struggle Climbing Show. Hey, did you know that The Struggle's carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Have you heard of Alex Honnold? Well, he has a foundation, and it's awesome. They are doing amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. You can check out their latest grant recipients right now over at honnoldfoundation.org. They're supporting some amazing projects in communities. Check it out and toss them some love if you can. They're doing some really good work over there. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. Really grateful to be a part of that group. This show was produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin. Well, I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you're struggling, well, just remember that the struggle makes us stronger. See you next week.